Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar book review. This is going to be my review for Avatar The Last Airbender Smoke and Shadow Omnibus Edition. Today is the release date for this book, October 5th. It's out tomorrow, October 6th in comic book stores, but in general this week is the release week for the book. So it's the fourth Omnibus edition we've had. This is the third printing of Smoke and Shadow. So that's kind of interesting, and I suppose that's where to start with this is what is an omnibus edition? How does this differ than the other printings? So when Smoke and Shadow first came out, it was released as individual parts. You had Smoke and Shadow Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. It has three 72-page books which together make up Smoke and Shadow. Then shortly after that, we got the first collected edition Smoke and Shadow, which is the big library edition hardcover of Smoke and Shadow. Again, all three parts are in here. It's a much bigger book than one of these ones, or even the Omnibus. The Omnibus is the same size as an individual part, for anyone wondering. It's just thicker because it's a 3-in-1. But there's your main sort of buying decision, in my opinion. At this stage, because of the Omnibus Edition release, I don't think you really need to consider the individual parts. So your buying decision should either be buy digitally, where you don't have to worry about a physical copy. You buy your Omnibus Edition if you want just the 3-in-1, most of the extras, and the smaller size. Or if you're more of a collector, you go for the big hardcover collection, where it has basically everything. So that's the kind of core idea here. The final thing to get across here is just sort of what is and is not included in each of them. Obviously the story is the exact same in all editions. That doesn't change. The main difference is, of course, that this seems like it's massively bigger, but you have to keep in mind that there's huge amount of space on the sides, top and bottom of the library edition pages for the annotations throughout the book. And obviously there's not a lot of pages that actually have the annotation commentary from the creative teams in this book. So that's something you do have to factor in, is that yes, the art is bigger here, but it's not as big as it initially seems just comparing the outside of the book. So the annotations are pretty much the only really exclusive thing to the library editions. They're the only thing that's not in the Omnibus. So that's important to keep in mind. Otherwise, the art extras at the back, which I'll show up here, you get 10 pages of art extras at the back of concept art for characters and covers. Those extras are in the back of this book as well. So you can see here, exact same page. All of them are included. No pages are left out. So this has basically everything. And as I've said many times before, even though I'm a collector and a super hardcore fan, I don't really value the annotations that highly. So my suggestion would definitely be that you get the hardcover because you want the hardcover. And you want the bigger art more so than anything else. So there's the differences between the editions. So this is a nice, cheap way, a new printing to get the book, and it has most of the extras that you would want. The other thing going forward is, of course, brand new cover here by Team Gurihuru. So they're back to do covers for their books. Really nice stuff here. Azula front and center. Interesting choice because to a degree it's actually a bit of a spoiler about the book, because Azula isn't revealed to be properly, in the book until much later on. It's a reveal that obviously reveals that she was in it before, but interesting that they went front and center. They're not worried about spoilers or anything like that. But you can also see here Suki in the background, Mei, who's a really important character in the book, Zuko, and Aang. So they got the decision on a lot of the characters, spot on. Maybe they could have had Ukano in here, Mei's father, but I get it. They want the kind of younger, the characters that people recognize, more so than the characters who maybe represent more of what exactly goes on in the book. So there's that. Back cover is just a shot of Mei and Zuko from the book, highlighting that is a dynamic that does get explored quite heavily as we go through the book. If you are unfamiliar with Smoke and Shadow, the basic gist of the story is that this is where Zuko starts to encounter a bit of... people start to speak out against Zuko, against his reign as the Fire Lord. They are led by Mei's father, Ukano, who obviously, if you remember from how Mei was introduced, Ukano was sort of relatively high up political figure in the Fire Nation, put in charge of Omashu. So he supported Ozai, and that continues here with the idea of the new Ozai society opposing Zuko. A lot of stuff begins to happen here. There's kidnappings, as one of the parts sort of gets across here. These mysterious cloaked figures begin to kidnap children from the Fire Nation capital, and there's just a lot going on. Can Zuko handle this pressure and all this stuff going on, while also dealing with, as of the promise, he's broken up with Mei, but will their relationship come back together? But then Mei's in a relationship with this other character, and it's really, really interesting what goes on. And like the library edition cover, I think gets that across quite nicely. That Aang comes in a little bit later on in the story, but it's mainly focused on like Zuko and Mei primarily as the focus here. Ursa also has a really nice arc in this, and I would definitely say that it's one of the better Avatar comics. I think it's superior than North and South and in balance. The only, I think, maybe criticism that you could level against Smoke and Shadow is just that it's a comic that really begs to be followed up, and it hasn't been followed up yet. And what it initially came out in 2015, 16, we haven't had any follow-up to this since then, and it's been 5 years. It'll be 6 next year, and this is like the furthest into Azula's story we've ever gone, and that's why it's interesting. She is the focus character here, because they do some really interesting stuff with Azula in this book towards the end. And then they just leave it there, and they haven't come back to it. And she is a character where everyone wants to know what happens with her. Obviously, the term redemption arc comes up, and you obviously have a lot of people interpreting that whatever way you want. But the idea is just that they are doing something with her character to make her more complicated than just a standard villainous character. I don't think they're going down the complete full Zuko redemption style arc, but they are trying to add extra layers to her character to make you see her in a slightly different way. And they could go a variety of different ways where they ended this book. This is probably my most anticipated sort of thing to follow up on if they eventually get back to telling the mainline story, is I want Azula to be the focus of an upcoming book. This is the book that needs to get a sequel as soon as possible to resolve the Mei and Zuko stuff finally. Can we have that relationship fully confirmed now? It's been so long. Can we come back to Azula after all this time? Otherwise, I think it's a fantastic book. Mei gets to be a main character here. You have Ty Lee, Suki as support characters. There's a lot of cool action sequences. And there's some nice spirit stuff here and lore about the early Fire Nation. So it hits all of the main kind of beats that I want out of a story. It just is an unusual book because it needs a follow-up, whereas a lot of the other books are more self-contained. And that's really the only thing that's going on there. So I really like Smoke and Shadow. I think the first 4 Avatar comics were really, really strong. And then it started to go off a little bit with North and South and Imbalance. But they're still really good themselves. So the final thing to get into here, I suppose, is bringing in the other Omnibus editions and the whole spine image thing. And unfortunately, this is where we're going to have to get into a little bit of negativity, because if you just look at this here, you can probably tell just on the camera there that the spine image, a mistake was made somewhere, either on the Rift or I think more specifically on Smoke and Shadow. Something went wrong. The image is not what it needs to be on Smoke and Shadow. They've repeated stuff that they've already done, in that you can see on Smoke and Shadow you have Sokka's whole face basically, apart from the bit that we're going to get I guess on North and South. But they also include the same bit that's on the Rift cover as well. Same with look at Aang's arm. His whole arm is in the Rift, but then they include his elbow in Smoke and Shadow. It's really, really badly off. And considering that if I just take out Smoke and Shadow and look at these ones, it's pretty nicely done overall. If I can just level these up properly, you know, you could see like the way the transition from like the spine of the book into the side, like it's not perfect, but the actual image on the spines aren't really repeating anything. So there's a little bit of a gap, but they're not full on duplicating parts of the characters, and so the image still comes across cleanly, given that it's across multiple books. But then you bring in, sorry, this goes here, this, and you have double Aang elbow, double Sokka head, and stuff like that. It just isn't great, and I don't know how it went so wrong. And it's just so unfortunate, because it is probably the main thing as a collector to, if you were rebuying this for the omnibus, is that, yeah, the new covers are nice because there's a sort of clean factor to the white background, characters as the kind of focus of everything. That's cool. But really, it's about that spine image thing. It's the same appeal for the deluxe art books and stuff like that, is that you are getting that cool on-shelf display piece of you're forming the North and South Library Edition cover across the images here on the spines, but then they've messed it up here pretty badly. So I think that's most of the review I want to get across. In general, the price point for the omnibuses, the value, and the fact that they do include most of the extras makes it, to me, the go-to way to get a physical copy of these comics. The North and South Omnibus is coming out in February. That is confirmed. That should finish the spine image, which leaves the potential Imbalance Omnibus in an interesting spot because, one, it's a change of creative team. Gurihuru doesn't do the art in Imbalance. Peter Wortman does. So are we going to get Team Gurihuru doing the Imbalance cover, or will we get an art style change for the omnibuses and Peter Wortman will do a cover and maybe start a new spine image? I'm not sure, but again, we're not expecting that book to maybe, when it eventually gets announced, to probably release towards the end of next year. So we don't really know what the full situation is, in that right now they're not continuing the story. Now, is there a sense for, like, might they collect the 3 one-shot comics into a library edition and then later an omnibus? Perhaps. But I don't think they're directly part of this line, this continuation of stories. So that Imbalance omnibus, I feel they have to do it just to reprint it again. But it's going to feel a bit weird just being on its own, in that, you know, there's a Zuko part of this image left to cover, and then what? Is this just going to be like a small bit on the outer edge of the image, or are they just going to have it be a kind of generic kind of cover as the 6th book? Interesting to see what they do there. The final section of this review is just, I'm going to switch over to myself on my computer in my image editing software, showing you the progress of the spine image. We'll do a little bit more analysis on how badly Dark Horse got it wrong for the Smoke and Shadow spine image, and how much more of the overall image is left to cover. Okay, so I did my best to explain this on camera, but just for a closer look here in the image editing software. Here's a picture I took of the 4 spines of the omnibuses together, and then in the background is the North and South Library Edition cover, which is what the spine images are actually creating. So you can see here I've matched up, in terms of size, the sleeve of Katara here to the size of her sleeve on the background cover, and you can see here it's pretty accurate here, but then you can see where they've made the sort of changes in terms of the overall image is more squished together on both sides to bring Sokka across. You know, it brings Aang across as well, with, if we look at this kind of cape up here as well, and you can see the difference between how far like Toph is across here. If we match it up with Sokka more accurately, you can see here Katara is brought across quite heavily as well, and then just looking at the image, there's actually a complete gap in the original image between Katara and Sokka, and then Aang, you can see him, whereas here they're grouped up and kind of layered over each other, so that's kind of interesting. Again, the other difference is that the background here with the snow is taken out, so it's not so specific to North and South. which leaves us with this interesting idea of like, okay, what's next for the North and South Omnibus? What does it have to cover? It has to include all of Sokka's arm and Zuko. Now, I think this is probably what actually opens up the door to the idea that they actually probably have room to do the other the two books and include it. So Imbalance actually might be included here because they have to fit all of Zuko in on the side here. There's only a slight bit of red down here where you can actually see that Zuko's sort of included. So they still have all of Sokka's arm and all of Zuko, which I doubt they're going to super squish in here all that much. So Imbalance will probably have like just the side of Zuko's fireball and maybe a little bit of Sokka's arm. So I think that's an interesting point. But let's get into the error here in that it's pretty accurate for the most part in that, like, okay, like Katara's hair loopy and then it's got a fraction of her forehead, and then you can see on the Search Omnibus she doesn't have her hair loopy here and a fraction of her forehead isn't there. So they've actually done the image, I think, perfect in terms of the first 3 books. But then it's so off here. So if we switch over to this image, it kind of gets across that little bit better. It shows you sort of the gap between it. So here's just the 2 books, placed up next to each other. So you can see sort of this inner piece of Aang's elbow compared to the inner piece of Aang's elbow on Smoke and Shadow. And you can see that this is sort of like, I have it off a little bit, sorry. It's about that much. The gap is about that much, which is pretty much half the width of a spine of one of the books, which, given that this is an attempt to do something quite accurately, for it to be off by half the width of and one of the images that is a piece of the overall image is absolutely crazy. That I don't even know how this necessarily happened. Now maybe it's confusion with regards to like whatever they're working off, and that they do have to base it off this original image, but then there's an edited image that is the spines of the books. It almost feels like they had it up to like here and then they just used the other image, and that's why there's that offset or something. Because it's kind of weird, because if you get rid of this and kind of move it across, and you can sort of see the idea of like, if they were accurate, and this is moving the rift across and assuming that the rift is wrong, which I don't think it is. I think Smoke and Shadow is where they've made the issue, but it highlights quite a substantial thing, because like it's a big chunk, like I said here. This much of the image on the rift has been repeated again on Smoke and Shadow. So what's going on here? And then, are they going to make the same mistake over here? I don't know how they address this or anything like that. I doubt they're going to get enough complaints where they feel like they need to address it. But given that it's one of the selling points of the Omnibus edition, I'd like them to say something about it, because it's not just a thing where like you can put this down as like, oh, it's a slight printing error that like it's off by like a millimeter or something like that you can sort of understand. This is where it's clearly an error, in that a printing error you'd assume would lose bits of the image. There's no way a printing error would reprint more of the image, because the printer's just printing what they've been sent. And they've obviously been sent the spine image, including part of the image that they've already done. This much of it. So someone somewhere in the process has made a pretty bad mistake here, and I wonder how this is going to affect the image going forward, because Smoke and Shadow is off compared to the Rift. So is the North and South cover going to match with Smoke and Shadow, or is it going to match with the Rift and just Smoke and Shadow will feel out? This is so weird. I wonder, will they address this in maybe like a second print run on this book whenever that happens? It will be corrected in some way. I hope that happens, because I wouldn't mind buying a second copy of the book just to have the image match up a little bit better, but it's more work than we as fans should have to do. And given that these books are just reprints, and the only real new factor in these books is the new cover, which is done by the artists, and then the spine image, it should be a lot better than this. But yeah, that's where I'm going to end this one and just go back to the video. So with that done, that brings the video to an end. In the comments, if you have any questions about the Smoke and Shadow Omnibus Edition, let me know. Otherwise, if you have it already, let me know what your thoughts are. And especially if you do have all the Omnibus Editions, let me know, is the way your spine image lines up just as bad on your copies as it is on mine? Like I said, I think it is the Rift and Smoke and Shadow that is the main problem. And so let me know, are your books like this? Is your Rift much thicker compared to Smoke and Shadow and the other ones? Or is it just that the Smoke and Shadow one, they printed the wrong piece of the image? So yeah, let me know there. But that has been Smoke and Shadow Omnibus Review. Thanks for watching, and bye.